Hey, welcome to the Social 333 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bentley. Today, my guest is Jan Yuhas and Jillian Yuhas. Yes?
You got it.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself, whichever one wants to go first. Jan, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Jan Yuhas. I am a relationship consultant and entrepreneur and author of Boundary Badass. My sister and I are identical twins. We have been coaching for almost a little over 10 years now. We work, like I said, we work with couples, we work with executives and entrepreneurs in terms of helping them through conflictual situations and bridging the gap in perspectives and finding common ground in order to move forward with growth and an effective way.
Nice. So, Jillian, one of the questions I have for you was about the boundaries part of it. Are we talking about boundaries for like couples and relationships? Are we talking about for business? Are we talking about for both?
Well, you need boundaries in every type of relationship, whether it's personal or professional, because it allows both people to be able to effectively communicate their needs and wants, but also do it from a we mindset. And the reason why you need to be able to speak up and talk about these things is because people can't read each other's minds. And if there's things go unspoken, that's how resentment and conflict builds over time. And so in order to really bridge the gap between two perspectives, we need to have a conversation.
So I know for boundaries, I'm going to kind of kick it to I know our audience is more like entrepreneurs and small business owners, but I was going to kind of kick it to the relationship stuff. So I was in therapy for a little while because I had a pretty toxic relationship that I was in. And the thing about boundaries that I found out is that you can say that you're going to set up a boundary, but if that person tests the boundary and you bend that boundary, now you really don't have a boundary anymore. You have like a kind of like a C-shaped boundary, right? Like you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go to bed every single night at 10 o'clock and you're not going to change my mind. And then the person's like, well, let's stay up and watch Netflix till 10:30. Well, like now you've kind of compromised because you're like, well, okay, I guess I'll just do it this once. And then before you know it, that once turns into kind of like an all the time thing.
So going to bed at 10 p.m. would be more of a personal boundary for yourself. If your partner wanted you to stay up later, then maybe you negotiate that you stay up later on the weekends or days that you don't have to get up early for work. So you're compromising in that sense that you're honoring the relationship at the same time. But then your partner also has to understand that maybe you need more sleep than they do. And so that becomes a discussion about your own needs within your lifestyle that you wouldn't compromise on. But really, when it comes to relationship boundaries, we negotiate it more like a business agreement in order to, on a shared value. So you want to set your top 5 values, whether this is in business or within the relationship itself. And then we find alignment based on that value with both individuals. So each person has a buy-in and gives their voice of their perspective, and we find the mutual common ground. So both people have an incentive to want to honor the relationship boundary.
So in business, obviously it's a little bit different. I've experienced because I've worked in corporate worlds before, right? So you have something where, it'll be like, oh yeah, I really need this project, and you're only supposed to work, it's not like a punch a clock kind of job, but like you're based on salary. So you have to go into work and it's on a Saturday, but you're not supposed to do that on Saturdays because the office is closed. They don't appreciate you coming in anyway, but it's a special project and we want you to come in. And then before you know it, like you're in the office just about every Saturday now. So because of that boundary being broken where you don't, now it's expected, right? Because you now move the boundary past. What do you guys coach or what do you guys talk about to people that are business owners or are in situations like that where you have employees and now you're pushing your employees to work on their off day or push them even harder? What do you kind of suggest for situations like that?
Yeah. Well, so you want to be able to show respect for your employees. Otherwise, they are going to more likely exit the company or organization if they feel like they're not being respected or heard or valued. And so I think it's very important that you have those open dialogues and discussions with your employees, but talk about, hey, are you able to work extra? Like, versus telling them that they have to work extra. But sometimes those employees may say, listen, I want to like renegotiate my contract in terms of working those extra hours if I'm going to be, required to work outside of the original employment contract. And so a lot of those times is having those discussions, but you have to value your employees if you want to keep your organization running and functioning, because they are part of the system. And so they produce the work. And so those conversations, even though you might be the boss, you still have to be able to discuss what that looks like collectively as an organization, so there's mutual respect. Otherwise, those people also aren't going to come to you when there's a problem, because they're going to be fearful. There's a lack of psychological safety in place, which means they're going to hold back from telling you the honest truth if there is a problem, if they don't feel respected.
Yeah, that's kind of what I went through. So they would be like, okay, well, you have X amount of cases that you have to do, and you have to do them, and then before you know it, you're working like Saturdays and Sundays, and then you're working basically every day, and then you're like, well, I see them firing so many people, like I don't want to be another person fired, so you kind of go with the flow, and then eventually you wake up one day just like really resenting not only your life but going to work, and it's just like it's just a negative feeling, right?
Yeah, you're creating a culture of going to be potentially high turnover if you know that you are a really good employee or have a really good skill set, then you know that you can take that somewhere else if you feel like your job requirements are outside of what you originally were hired to do within that role.
Now, talking about that, like what kind of made you go from just kind of like boundaries? Like I know about boundaries, and unfortunately I'm just a really nice guy, and I guess it's fortunate, right? But like sometimes I move my boundaries and then they get moved, and I'm just like, okay, well, I guess I will go to bed at 11 o'clock and watch Netflix, right? To keep people happy. But what kind of happened with your own personal story that you're like, okay, well, I need to turn this into some sort of business where I can help other people?
So we grew up in a rural farm town, about 900 people, and then we moved to a metropolitan city, about 3 million, and that was a huge culture shock for us. And at that point, we realized we didn't have strong boundaries, and back home, we were used to being heard and understood, and there was like integrity. There wasn't any like need to set boundaries for the most part. And so moving to a huge city, that was a struggle for us. And I think she and we can be a little bit more introverted at times, even though we have no problem voicing our value when it comes to our needs. But we learned in that moment that values are universally understood by others, where emotions are often one-sided perspectives that can be confusing for the other person to understand where you're coming from. And through opening our first business, that's where we really developed our Boundary Badass method. And in order to make sure you sustained a level of mutual understanding with your clients and alignment, that's where we started using our value method in order to set boundaries while sustaining the relationship with the client.
Talk to me more about these boundaries, because I know you can I'm on this huge Alex Hormozi, Tony Robbins thing, like a really huge, I went into this whole rabbit hole. That's what we were talking about before you guys showed up. But Alex Hormozi talks a lot about how, he, in his story of how he did it, like he would just be like, okay, well, you need to get exercise and I'm going to train you. I'll train you for free. And then eventually he got to the point where like he was training too many people, and he was like, all right, well, now I got to charge you something. So I'll just charge you like, whatever, $100 or whatever. And then before you knew it, it was like, well, like, you lost some people because he set a boundary. He's like, hey, look, like we're going to charge.
Yeah.
And then he lost some people, but then he was like, well, like now I got $700 coming in every single week. And he was like, this is great, because he was, he was poor, right? And then he was like, well, if I could charge $700, then I could probably charge $1,000 or $100. I could probably charge, 500, and the prices continue to go up. And he got better and better clients, or better and better paying clients, but he got more of his time back because he wasn't spending as much time working out all these people, right?
Correct.
And then you get into, this is your price, but then you're like, but I know you, and something such and such, and before you know it, your price sometimes comes down. With businesses, I know that happens a lot where even myself, like I'll go out and be like, okay, well, we list your home at 6%. Like you're getting me, you're getting my brand, you're getting all the marketing that I do, you're getting 1,000 people looking at you every single day or more than that. Right. And then this is my price. And they're like, well, like I know you and this happened or that happened, or I talked to Sally and you gave Sally like a little bit of a discount. That's kind of what the reason why I called you was because, Sally referred you and I want the same deal Sally did. Like, what do you recommend in situations like that?
Well, I think it depends on the business model because sometimes, price points for services or products can waver based on the economy or based on, room within that organization and how many clients they can take on. So sometimes that can fluctuate. But when it comes to, and sometimes, as a company, you might honor like a friends or family discount. You're not giving the service for free in terms of helping them, but you honor some sort of discount that you recognize the relationship you have with that person in order to still fulfill both your need to make an income and also in order to keep that referral system even coming in the future down the pipeline.
So one of the things that even my therapist talked about was like reframing no, right? So somebody would, like a significant other or an employee or something like that, where somebody comes to you and even let's take the Netflix thing, right? So I don't want to watch TV anymore. I want to go to bed because I got a big date the next day, but my significant other wants to watch Netflix and watch a scary movie or something, right? So you go through that whole deal and you're like, no, I can't do that. But sometimes no can lead to a pretty awful argument. Or if it's like a job situation, it could lead to that person being like, well, like, I guess I got to find a new job or like I'll quit on Monday, right? So kind of walk me through some steps of like reframing that so it's not so blunt and probably like heavy hitting.
Well, so sometimes you want to turn it into like a discovery question and say, help me understand how come we need to watch the Netflix this evening or late past like 11 o'clock. And so you're being curious about the relationship and asking how come they feel the need or how come they're not willing to understand where you're coming from based on your responsibilities to get up and go to work the next day. So we call that using discovery questions of being curious versus completely shutting down the conversation where the other person doesn't feel heard or respected or feel like that's where conflict starts to set in, because when you say no, the conversation sort of hits this like gridlock versus having this fluid conversation of trying to understand each other's perspectives and why it's important for each of you and how you can reach a compromise. So you might say, can you share more about X? Or help me understand how come you need to watch it tonight. You could even say like, what about watching it on Saturday night versus Wednesday night? So you're trying to ask questions, but also give solutions and get their perspective to dig deeper, because often what they say on the surface, there's an underlying need or met underneath the surface that we have to get to in order to reach a compromise.
And sometimes in romantic relationships, for example, I mean, it can happen in business too, but all of us have unresolved childhood wounds of some sort sometimes unless we really did the work. And so when someone hears the word no, that person can sense that as a rejection or that partner is not prioritizing them and they're abandoning like the relationship or something like that. So, or they feel like that person, there's like 5 childhood wounds. So that creates an automatic like nervous system response within us. And so then that creates even a bigger issue, and really it didn't need to get to that if we understood where that person was coming from by asking questions.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult part because I don't know, I'm a guy, right? So like a guy's like, oh, like, we're not going to do that. And I'm going to be like, oh, okay, well, we're very logical. We'll be like, well, why are we doing that? Okay, well, like I have to wake up early. Okay, cool. And like for me, or as for another guy, that may be like, enough, right? But for somebody that, like you said, maybe has some childhood issues or maybe parental issues with the childhood, or just in general, like just wants to be argumentative, that could lead into like a whole hour tirade where you could have just watched the movie and just been like done with it.
Yes, you could, but then you're also not honoring your voice or your need if you wanted to go to bed. So this is why we have to negotiate and find compromises that honors each partner's need in order to work towards a greater collective that the relationship is operating on mutual respect and everybody is feeling heard and understood.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of different things where, it'd be like, oh, okay, well, we'll watch like 15 minutes and we'll watch the rest later, which is kind of like a breadcrumbing kind of idea to me. And then I've also seen it in like the corporate workplace where somebody will show up, like we used to take our laptops home in case we had to work, and the person would take their laptop home and then they live far away and then they would forget their laptop and they would like drive all the way to the office and then be like, oh crap, like I forgot my laptop. And then the manager would be, depending on, I was in actually, and this is a real life situation, like I was sitting in the chair next to the manager and the manager really wanted to like pop off and be like, you idiot, blah, 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 right? Instead he was like, okay, well, I guess go work from home. So like that person spent, he lives far away, so he spent like another hour driving all the way home because he forgot his laptop. So it was like 2 hours of like unproductive work, which as an entrepreneur, like I'm just like, just pull the rest of the 2 hairs out of my bald head. Right?
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, you don't go anywhere without your laptop.
Yeah, so like, so I just, and he was just like, okay, well, make sure you don't do that again, and go work from home. Which, at the time, I thought to myself, like, well, like he didn't want to obviously like, totally throw that person under the bus, but at the same time, you could tell that the person, like the manager, was really upset and wanted to show, hey, look, like I'm the manager, and like you can't do that. But because because of that weakness, I was like, this person is like nice. I could probably do the same thing. Like, do you kind of?
So I think if it's a one-time thing that they maybe they had a crazy morning or something happened and they forgot their laptop and then they had to go back home. So yeah, they're wasted 2 hours of productive time there. If it was a continual habit, then I think you need to address it because it's creating a lack of productivity overall. And so then you would address it from, like maybe the value would be integrity or it might be that it could be that a policy starts to establish that they don't take their laptop home because they're struggling in order to show up to work and have integrity within their job and meet the needs of the company. So it's not always going to be like a black and white answer. You have to know if there's a pattern being developed or it's like a one-time off type of situation, whether you dive into it like deeper and go from there.
What are some of the biggest myths and misconceptions regarding boundaries? Because I know for myself, like it's really tough to stay in boundaries. Like I have some really hardcore boundaries where I'm just like, we're not doing that. Like there's no way in hell we're doing that. But I know there's like some myths behind it and some misconceptions about just setting up boundaries and like sticking to it.
So I think the biggest thing is people confuse boundaries with ultimatums. Ultimatums is a demand, or you're basically projecting your own personal expectations onto the relationship or another person. And so you're expecting them to follow your boundary without actually having a conversation, which doesn't show respect for the relationship. Where boundaries are about co-creating, collaboration. How can we work better together based on Netflix or based on time management? So you're really having a negotiation strategy conversation with someone when it comes to boundaries, where I think a lot of times people will set trauma-informed boundaries, which sounds like more like an ultimatum where they're in fear or threat or feel like they need to state something. So boundaries are a we mindset where, except when you have personal boundaries with yourself, and boundaries are very value-based, where ultimatums are more emotion-based.
Is there any tools or methods? I don't want you guys giving away like the secret sauce, but like I know you brought the book, which I want you to show. But is there anything that in the book, like tools or like methods or anything like that?
The whole book is full of
The book is meant to be a book you can refer back to at any point in time. So the first 10 chapters are all about psychology and understanding and developing your value system and being able to help you learn, emotional regulation exercises and activities and how to honor your values on a day-to-day basis in your personal or professional life.
Yeah, we want to establish our top 5 values to operate by, because then we're in alignment with our authentic truth in terms of who we are, and our behaviors are in alignment with those values. But our values also meet our emotional needs on a deeper level.
Yeah. But the reason why our method is you're allowed to bring up a conversation even if it's uneasy emotionally, because you're using your values and not your emotions. So people aren't going to know that it's necessarily uneasy for you because you're not revealing such your emotional wounds or your unmet need. You're talking through a place of value, which is why it works effectively. But in our book, we do, on chapter 9, we actually give you the actual method to use in every relationship. And then chapters 10 through 28, each chapter is dedicated to a different type of boundary. So there's a chapters on financials. There's a chapter on neighbors boundaries. There's a chapter on time boundaries, couple boundaries, family boundaries, all sorts of boundaries. And it tells you different types of boundaries and how to set the boundary in those types of relationships or dynamics and situations.
So if you do have an uncomfortable situation and you have to set a boundary, how would you go about doing it outside of the negotiation part?
First, you want to assess so you can understand where your partner or business colleague is coming from, because we need to understand their perspective or their mindset and where they're we don't want to ask why questions, because that can shut somebody down. Like why do you need to stay up late and watch a movie till 11 o'clock? So that can put the other person on the defense. Instead, we said, can you share with me how come it's important to you that we stay up till 11 o'clock on, quote unquote, school night when we have work tomorrow morning? And so you're assessing to understand the difference in mindsets before we even get into proposing a solution or negotiating a solution that both people can honor.
What was really interesting is the value over feelings, or a value instead of feelings. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was a really big thing in my past relationship, where it was a lot of feelings and then me misunderstanding feelings and not reading it. And obviously there was a lot of conflict.
Well, yes. So if you're having a lot of emotional conversations, it is going to heighten conflict, because emotions tend to elevate and escalate conflict much quicker than if we're using our values and speaking more from a place of logic and understanding. And so we're still using empathy when we're having these more of a value-based conversation, but we're speaking in a way. So we might say, I feel misunderstood, or I feel ignored when asking to pause Netflix during the weeknights. I value work-life balance, or I value time, or I value personal space, whatever it may be. But you're just basically saying that what you value, and because that's what you're going to honor. But then you're also saying, how can we find a middle ground that we're both happy with? And so you always want to end in a discovery question. But the first part of it is you're saying, I feel ignored, misunderstood. But in a business setting, we would say it seems or it appears, and we detach from that. You could do that in personal relationships too, because you're trying to take the conversation from a negative to a positive outcome.
I want to dive a little deeper on this. So
Okay.
I'm trying not to get too personal. So you have a situation, and I know there's a ton of entrepreneurs and business owners that are like me, right? Where you work 16 or 18 hours a day. You just work a lot, right? And if you have a significant other that's not a working part in your relationship, or you're in your business, excuse me, and you have them and they're kind of like the outside looking in, which is you work a lot, you don't have time for me. You used to be so fun, and then you started this company, and now you're just always busy. And I'm trying not to get too personal, but something along those lines where
Yes.
it's the outside looking in, and it's easy to be oh, well, there's a lot of animosity, maybe there's some negativity, and it's because they're feeling like they're not getting enough attention, or you're spending all your time doing this. But, and I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs or small business owners are in the same boat. And then you're like, okay, well, now I'm going to stop. And from this time to this time is your block. Like, you can listen to me, or I listen to you. I don't say anything about work. I don't do any work. It's just all about you. You can vent. We can go watch Netflix. We can go eat, Popeye's chicken, whatever it is, right? Like, that's their time, and you allot it to them. Or, and what I've messed up in the past is, like, I would be like, okay, well, I've worked all this time, made all this money. We're going to go on vacation for this many days, and that's going to be our time. And then you come back, and it's like a withdrawal syndrome. So then the person withdraws because now it's like right back to where we were, right? So it kind of goes back. Talk to me about situations like that where you have a boundary and you're like, look, like, I have to work. In order for me to work and provide, like, I have to work these many hours, and then those many hours, like, I'm going to give you this block, and then from that block, that's it. Or I wouldn't say the vacation thing because I don't think that works really well, but talk to me about boundary like that way, because I know every entrepreneur and small business owner runs into the same problem.
Yeah, so you want to create consistency within the relationship. And so whether that's establishing a date night once a week or every other week, or maybe it's like having breakfast together in the morning, whatever that, looks like, you're trying to establish consistency throughout the relationship. But really, you only need 30 minutes a day to have a daily touch with a partner in the relationship. And that provides sustainability long term. So
I think you also want to, before you get into that, I think you also want to let your partner know that you validate them and you hear what you're saying. So it sounds like what you're saying is there's been a shift in our relationship, or you don't feel like we're spending enough time together. Is that correct? So you want to make sure you're understanding where they're coming from. And then you say, and if you're a new entrepreneur and all of a sudden this is like a new schedule, so yeah, there is going to be a pretty big shift. But if you met them and that you were already an entrepreneur then, so they would already be aware of your schedule. And then maybe a new project came out and you started working more hours, then you would say, like, you might want to give them a preview. Like, I have this new project coming up or this new build out I need to work on. I might be spending a little bit more time in the office working on this, but I still want to make sure that I'm meeting our relationship needs. What would work for you in terms of making sure we have that quality time on a weekly basis. So you're not just automatically changing behaviors. Maybe have a discussion prior to getting into the change of behaviors. So then that way everyone's on the same page. It's not a shock to the other person where they start to feel neglected.
I know a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners run into the same problem because opportunities come to you, and then all of a sudden you're working, and if you're like a one-show band or a one-man band kind of deal, and you're like doing everything, you're like, okay, today I'm doing taxes, and then the next day you're like, an hour later you're like, I'm doing payroll, and then an hour later you're like, I'm in sales, right? Like you just, or you're hiring. The next hour you're like HR, right? And then before you know it, you're like, well, like, it's 10 o'clock and I'm pretty tired, and your significant other is like sitting in the chair staring at you, and you're like, I'm really tired, but I have to spend time, right? And you have a great point of like kind of really telling the person, hey, look, like, I'm going to be busy from this time to this time. I know a lot of business owners and small and entrepreneurs, a lot of times what they'll do is like they'll get an office so like they can stay away from the spouse, and they'll be like, well, I got to go to the office. And then that creates a whole nother ripple because the spouse is usually like, well, what's happening in the office? Like, are they actually working? That kind of stuff.
Well, in those situations, though, people are going to sense energy being exchanged between their spouses. So of course they're going to question that. But if the partner says, hey, this came up, this client really needs this work done by midnight tomorrow because they have to turn it into, let's say, their attorney or whatever it may be, like, and they're communicating that up front, they're being transparent and honest, your partner's going to be more understanding because they're going to feel like you're communicating with them. It's when you don't communicate up front where then they start to feel, can I trust you? Is something else going on? Or they're going to feel uneasy because they feel like they're on the sideline, not a part of your life. And they don't want to feel second to your business. They want to feel like you have a collective lifestyle where you're able to balance work, life, love, friendship, social, whatever that looks like throughout your entire overall lifestyle. So it's prioritizing the communication in the relationship and being transparent. But like I said, it really just takes 30 minutes a day to really have those daily touches with a partner, and they're going to feel more at peace versus questioning your ability or if you can uphold a relationship because of your work schedule.
Is there like a step that you would recommend for a small business owner or entrepreneur or just anybody, like, something out of the book, like a small nugget for somebody just to start, like their first step of creating a healthy boundary where, whether it be their personal or business life?
So learning discovery questions, which are open-ended questions. So you don't want to ask closed-ended questions, which end in a yes or no, because that's going to shut down the conversation fairly quickly. So knowing how to use your discovery questions, you use them on sales calls with people, you use them with the friends, family, a partner, whoever it may be. So learning discovery questions, which are sometimes people call them clarifying questions, that is going to be your go-to method skill. Because also too, if someone's saying something to you, whether it's a partner or a client, and you get stuck, you can use them also in the moment to buy yourself time until you have a better answer to the question they asked the first time. So they should be in your back pocket at all times in business or life.
Jan, Jillian, if somebody wanted to reach out and get more information, maybe talk to you about your book, or maybe you like come out and speak to a company or themselves if they're in their personal space, how would they find you?
They can head over to janandjillian.com or 28consultancy.com, and they can find us there. We're also on social media as well under both those companies.
Jan, Jillian, appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thank you.